Hi, I'm Jasmine, and this is Not Another PD. It's for helping professionals who are tired of theoretical training that doesn't translate to the work you actually do. Here, we talk boundaries, leadership, systems, and how to protect your well-being while doing complex work every day. I'm so glad you're here. Episode 25. Welcome, everyone. Today's conversation is one I feel so incredibly privileged to share with you all. We're exploring what cultural supervision and cultural load really means for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander helping professionals and how workplaces and leaders can create spaces that are culturally safe, supportive, and affirming. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Yaleela Torrens. Yaleela is a proud Guren Guren and Budjalung woman living and working on her ancestral lands of Gladstone. She's a dedicated mother and advocate in the local Gladstone allied health sector. As the founder of her own private practice, Yaleela blends her social work expertise with leadership in allied health to drive positive change and enhance community well-being. She also serves on the boards of Rosebery, Queensland, Mindcare Gladstone and Billa Empower, championing initiatives that create meaningful impact across the region. Welcome, Yaleela. It's so great to have you here.
Galangiri Jasmine, in the Guren Guren language of my people where I'm come from, we say good morning. And thank you for having me. I'm very, very honoured to connect with you this morning.
Thank you so much. Could you start us off with just sharing a little bit about your professional journey and what led you into the helping professions?
Yeah, absolutely. I completed my undergraduate degree about 12 years ago, and then it was when I had my daughter. She was 6 months old. I realised that I wanted to go into the helping profession, and I found social work was aligned to my values, but also to a lot of the socio-political challenges that were occurring in my community, in the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community. So I was driven and attracted to social work. And I completed my Masters of Social Work when my daughter was 6 months old. And over that time, I was able to progress in my career working for different organisations, particularly an Aboriginal health organisation, where I was able to complete my qualification and get to my mental health accreditation. And and I jumped out into private practice, and I've been here now nearly 3 years. Operating my own private practice here in Gladstone, but working across not just the region, but also now across Australia through a variety of initiatives and contracts that I work through.
That's amazing. And same as you, I was also studying with a young child as well. So I can only imagine how difficult that was for you, but well done.
Thank
And
you.
Yaleela, what does cultural supervision mean to you? And could you perhaps explain what makes it different from mainstream or traditional supervision models?
Yeah. So cultural supervision, right? I like to strip it right back to understanding politically where our people have been in relationship to the human services sector, but also more importantly our interaction and our history with the social work profession, which hasn't always been positive. It's actually been quite detrimental and at times violent. Given the history of the impact of our stolen generation, but also of many of the practices, the Western theories, the ideologies, and the rhetoric that the social work profession has contributed to the degradation of our people, whether that has been through the forced removal of our people, but also through upholding and reinforcing discriminatory practices, either through the child protection system, youth justice system, criminal justice system, through our health system, through our allied health systems. So a lot of my approach to cultural supervision is to start to embed, but also prioritise First Nations ways of knowing, being, and doing, right? So when employees or clinicians are referred to me for supervision, cultural supervision, I am privileging our ways and our knowledges and our ways of knowing, being, and doing in human services practice.
Thank you so much for explaining that, Yaleela. And the Yala report describes cultural load as often invisible expectations placed on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander professionals, like being asked to educate others or represent community voices. Can you perhaps explain how have you seen cultural load show up in your experience, and then what impact that can have on practitioner well-being?
As with any form of practice, and I'm referring to social work practice here or any kind of human services practice, we operate, we're always working at different levels. So whether that's interpersonally, our cultural load, where we are engaging in a lot of either educational or we're spending a lot of time and energy upskilling our peers or our colleagues that are either not First Nations or that are First Nations but may have, be on their own journeys of identity and reconnection to their communities and Aboriginality or to their Torres Strait Islander communities as well, or whether that is from your more macro or structural cultural load as well, where you're engaging in, for example, board director work. A lot of what I do in my communities as well, and sit on 2 local boards, but also 1 national board, where a lot of our expertise around First Nations challenges, but also First Nations, again, ways of knowing and being, doing it, and how we implement that into organisations. It can be burdensome. It can be, there can be a lot of education and a lot of growth, and we can empower a lot of organisations, but it does come at that toll of being able to sustain, that level or that momentum over a long period of time, particularly if you don't have the workforce or you don't have the capacity within your community where you can share that load as well. So what I find in Aboriginal communities, there might be 1 or 2 or 3 people in your community that are leaders in the field and that can engage and be, operate or, have capacity to sit on boards, but then our capacity to actually engage in structural reform or, say, the development of a reconciliation action plan, or to plan and host events throughout the year, at times that can be very hard to sustain.
It definitely sounds like a lot of pressure in addition to all of the other things that you're doing, parenting, have your own private practice. So it definitely sounds like a lot of extra responsibility.
It does. But, like many of the leaders across our country that are doing incredible work, a lot of our either political figures or our leaders in our health system, or leaders in the legal system, that are advocating or they're fighting structurally for example, like our treaty that's, just been passed, not in Queensland but in Victoria, and the incredible work. There are people that, have to stand up, and you have to either have that natural inclination to leadership, which I do, I'm kind of wired this way, but also that pressure, it falls on to our next generation, as it always has done, and that's how our people have survived. Jazmin, we've been able to be really good Aboriginal people at succession planning. We have always had systems and processes in place, prior to colonisation, where we have been able to maintain our knowledge systems and our hierarchies and our protocols, because that is the way that, our people have been supported over generations, and our elders have been there to coach us and guide us as well.
And definitely you're, such an inspiration and role model, I'm sure, not just for your community, but also for, First Nations professionals and communities, throughout Australia as well. And I'm sure as well that you're also going to be training your young daughter to be a future leader as well, which is also amazing. For myself, Yaleela, I'm a non-First Nations helping professional, and there are many other non-First Nations helping professionals, so non-Indigenous supervisors and leaders that genuinely want to create culturally safe spaces, but they're not really sure where to start. Are there any practical ways for non Indigenous supervisors and leaders to try and support their staff who are First Nations and create more like culturally safe workplaces?
Yeah, absolutely. So many strategies and so many approaches that we can take with this. I think any kind of change or anything that we want to grow in, Jasmine, always starts with ourselves. So if I want to learn about particular topics, or if I want to embed different knowledges or approaches within my private practice, I have to have the willingness and the initiative to actually go out and seek that knowledge myself, right? So self-education, I would be seeking out your Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander resources and engaging in some independent learning and self-directed learning. There's a lot of resources through the Australian Association of Social Workers as well, where you can get your PD, and you can reach out to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social workers, like you've done today with me. You can set aside, a budget or resources to engage in, consultants or supervisors that can come in and actually coach you and support you as to how better that you can respond to, say, First Nations clients, or seek out collaborative partnerships within your communities, or just generally how that you can make it a bit more affirming for First Nations people into your practices, your businesses, and then also, being able to engage in some allyship as well. I think that's always really important, because a lot of our social work is, a key value here is social justice. So if we're going to stay true to the social workers, who we are and what we say that we do and how we've been trained, we also have to engage in that social justice work as well. That's really important. So engaging in allyship and learning about the socio-political landscape as well, of what's going on in our communities, why the referendum was so important, why the treaties are so important, and to understand the history of this country as well, and really validating that, and ensuring that, when the time is right and when it needs to, our First Nation voices are privileged and prioritised over Western ways.
Thank you, Yaleela. There's some really great practical tips there that I'm sure that listeners will be able to take some of these actions away and implement some of them immediately. And we briefly touched on the concept of cultural supervision a little bit earlier. Cultural supervision, is this primarily for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander helping professionals, or is it also quite valuable for non-Indigenous and non-First Nations practitioners such as myself wanting to actually work in a more culturally responsive way?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to engaging in any kind of diversity work, or if it's upskilling, I find this form of supervision, all practitioners should engage in some form of cultural supervision, because more often than not, right, 99% of the time, when you're a social worker or you're in the human services sector, you are going to come in contact with clients that are of First Nations descent or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage, right? So when we have that level of responsibility, but also when we're faced with that level of vulnerability in our communities, where intersectionality is really in your face, when we read about it or we're trained in it from a social work perspective at uni, actually implementing that can be quite hard, because every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community is very unique. We have all different protocols. The socio-political landscape is constantly changing, and it's having a big influence on our interpersonal, but also our community, our relationships, but also funding as well. So it's understanding what are the First Nations organisations or your local Aboriginal medical services or your key stakeholders in your community, who they are, if they work at youth justice, if they're at the child protection agencies, if they're your foster carers, if they're your social workers or your psychs. So engaging in, supervision, cultural supervision, and tailoring that to your community, you can leverage a lot of that, because a lot of the time, it takes a lot of time to form those genuine relationships with Aboriginal people. And that supervision can be like a form of cultural vouching as well, if you want to start to embed your practice with First Nations approaches.
Thanks so much for explaining that, Yaleela. And for those practitioners who also supervise students on placement, and I supervise quite a lot of social work students on placement. And even if we just look at the diversity within the students as well, there's quite a lot of First Nations students, there's also international students. So I feel like working in a culturally responsive way would be beneficial for those who are supervising emerging practitioners as well.
Yep. And it's part of the truth telling, right? If you've got a predominantly large, I guess, number of supervisors that are coming from Western perspectives or Western ideologies and rhetorics, they're not going to be able to speak to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and or history and or lived history, right? And that's where you need to be able to seek out, like you have today, Jazmin, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social workers that are in the field, that are working in the field, but also can speak to the lived realities of our people from our perspectives, and also that can blend and combine what we're seeing in our communities, but also our knowledge is around, okay, how best to work clinically with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And it can be very difficult because it's a lot, and it's very, at large, our social work industry is being impacted significantly through changes to our political landscape, whether that's Medicare or the NDIS or funding or generally trying to achieve our registration. So there's a lot of pressure on our sector as it is. So being able to onboard and engage in supervision, it just gives you that, I think, that leveraging that we all need to make sure our practices are culturally safe and responsive.
Thanks so much, Yaleela. And I also wanted to ask you, and I ask this for all of my amazing guests, is there one particular boundary or practice that helps you protect your own well-being?
Boundaries, at times, yes, it's hard, Jazmin. I struggle with this idea of boundaries at times because I know how much my community need me, right? And collectively, our people, I think our boundaries interpreted were through order, right? Were through cultural protocols, which I think can translate into, from a Western perspective, this idea of boundaries. I think knowing when to provide my care and when my social work practice is needed, or culturally when I'm needed in spaces, that I can balance that with other people in my community. So recently we had quite a massive tragedy here in my community, which resulted in the death of multiple people, two of which were my family members. So in terms of my boundaries around that, it was around being able to provide the care when it was most needed by me. And then also being able to understand, okay, so whose role is it to do this work? Whose role is it to do that work? What capacity do I have to engage in, where is my care or my, say my skills for empathy and validation and compassion, all our soft skills that we're trained to influence and use in my trauma-informed approaches, being clear on who can be responsible for what and how can I share that load without having to compromise my cultural responsibilities to my community and being there for my kinship, and my people.
I can imagine it would be harder for you to implement those boundaries because you're so needed across so many different areas.
Yeah, and that's how our kinship systems work, Jazmin. That's how we've survived our people. It's kind of we open our homes to our mob, our people, and this is where we, in the textbooks, when we think about homelessness and overcrowding, and a lot of our kids get removed because of overcrowding, but essentially that's how our people have survived, and that's our kinship systems. That's how we work. We've always taken care of each other. So yeah, interpreting that from a Western perspective, going, oh well, boundaries when our mob are struggling, it's very hard at times to implement that kind of approach when we need each other. And when we come back to that trauma-informed care, sometimes we don't need therapy. Sometimes we need community and our mob and our people and just to sit there.
Thanks so much. That's why I also wanted you on the podcast, because I knew that you would have such amazing insights as well that I'm sure that others listening wouldn't even think of around, what does boundaries look like for every helping professional? It looks very different for everybody. So thanks so much for explaining that, Yaleela.
Yeah.
For those who would like to learn more about you or connect with you or perhaps even book in for some cultural supervision, how can people reach you?
Yeah, so through all my social media, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Reach out, inbox me, message me. My email address and my phone number. Jazz, I'll send that all through so you can share that with everybody.
Yes, I'll put all that in the show notes. I just really wanted to thank you so much, Yaleela, for sharing your insights and wisdom. And I encourage anyone listening to connect with Yaleela. I'll put all of her details in the show notes, and you can find out more about cultural supervision and a lot of the other services that Yaleela provides. Thank you so much again for joining me on Not Another PD.
Thanks so much, Jazmin. Absolutely honoured. I've had a great time this morning.
Thank you for joining me on Not Another PD. If this episode was helpful and you'd like to find out more, you'll find ways to work with me in the show notes. And if there's a topic you would like covered or someone you think should be on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. Remember, clear boundaries don't just protect our clients, they protect us too.